Lewis's deepest yearnings, however, were not for the comforts of his home, but for something that he later identified as joy. On 3 separate occasions during his childhood, Lewis recalls being swept away in a sudden violent desire for something higher than, quote, ordinary life and even ordinary pleasure, as in another dimension. It is that of an unsatisfied desire, which is itself more desirable than any other satisfaction. He spent the rest of his young adult life trying to recapture this sense of yearning, and would later understand that he had been experiencing the longing to be in home in heaven with Christ. This great yearning for heaven became the topic for many of his future works. After 2 years of suffering in Oldies, Lewis had a brief stint at a local school before entering a prep school associated with Malvern College. It was here a great tragedy occurred. Lewis abandoned his childhood faith. The matron of the school was a kind Christian woman, but pressed on Lewis the need to have a deep emotional experience associated with his prayers. Lewis would agonize for hours during his bedtime prayers, waiting for the proper emotional realization, often staying up all night. This sleep-depriving habit, combined with the new secular teachings of his classes, had him running from Christianity as fast as he could. His atheism became only more ingrained when he entered Malvern College and came under the tutelage of staunch atheist W.T. Kirkpatrick, whom Lewis affectionately called the Great Knock. The Great Knock was passionate about rational thinking and grilled Lewis in the art of logical argumentation. Though it was harmful to his faith at the time, this skill in debating would later help Lewis to defend Christianity against its opponents. Lewis would cling tightly to his atheism for nearly 20 years as he was accepted into Oxford University, fought in World War I, and returned to take his place as a distinguished professor at the Magdalen campus of Oxford. Throughout this time, Lewis encountered a series of divinely placed booby traps, finally forcing him to reconsider his stance on the existence of God. Quote, "Really, a young atheist cannot guard his faith too carefully. Dangers lie in wait for him on every side." One landmine which effectively derailed Lewis's confidence in atheism were the writings of G.K. Chesterton and George MacDonald. No matter how much Lewis attempted to dislike these staunchly Christian authors, they were unquestionably his favorites and touched him like no other writers, again awakening in him the desire for something other than. Though he fought it bitterly, Lewis felt God closing in on him, as if the suit of armor he had placed around his heart was becoming more and more constrictive. He says that he had the choice to, quote, "open the door or keep it shut. I could unbuckle the armor or keep it on." One night in 1929, he could stand it no longer and kneeled beside his bed, admitting that God did indeed exist, calling himself, quote, "the most dejected and reluctant convert in all of England." This initial conversion was only to theism, not to Christianity. It took Lewis 2 more years before he would officially become a follower of Christ. A major factor in this decision was a late-night conversation with famed author J.R.R. Tolkien. Lewis and Tolkien had become close friends over their mutual liking for ancient myth. They took their usual stroll around the campus grounds and began discussing the possible truth contained in myths. And as Dr. Art Lindsay describes it, quote, argued with Lewis that paganism prefigured Christianity and Christianity fulfilled paganism. Lewis struggled at first, but by the end of the conversation came to truly consider the possibility that, quote, pagan myths were echoes of reality and cosmic pointers to the true myth, the myth become fact in Christ. A few days later, while riding in the sidecar of his brother Warren's motorcycle on the way to the zoo, Lewis officially accepted Christ as his Lord. Lewis explains, "When we set out, I did not believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. And when we reached the zoo, I did." He doesn't remember saying a specific prayer, but explains, "It was more like a man, after long sleep, lying motionless in bed, becomes aware that he is now awake." He never looked back. In the last half of his life, Lewis wrote more than 40 books, which remained top sellers in Christian living, fiction, and apologetics. He quickly became known as the apostle to the skeptics. Lewis's arguments were so effective due to his constant use of vivid imagery and innovative analogy